So today we're going to start a journey that we're very excited to take, and we're going to take a deep dive into the mythology of Star Wars and some of the things that inspired George Lucas when he created the original trilogy. And we're also going to examine the inspiration for other Star Wars stories, including, the prequels a little bit, the Western and samurai tropes that appear in The Mandalorian as well. And Adam, I guess the inspiration for me for this whole idea began when I was kind of examining what the main difference is between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And I feel that the original trilogy succeeds so much and stands the test of time because it's based on these universal themes. These kind of the mythology, religion, hero's journey, all those types of things that all people can kind of relate to because it's this universal form of storytelling. And George Lucas even talks about how maybe there's like 8 or so major types of stories out there, and they just keep being retold in different ways. Maybe it's more than 8, but I heard him mention that at one point. And I feel like the sequel trilogy, as much as I love it, isn't based on those same things. It's more based on the mythology of Star Wars. So it's almost inspired by itself rather than necessarily being inspired by these, kind of deeper, universal things. So I think that's why the original trilogy is always going to, you know, succeed kind of more than the sequel trilogy. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't know. I, th- hmm, I think the sequel trilogy on its own, for me, it stands up fine. I think that with time, I honestly believe it's going to gain in popularity, and I think as it keeps doing that, for a lot of people, it's gonna pass those older movies. Maybe not for us. Maybe not for you. Maybe not for the ones that grew up.
Mhm.
That was where we got our start. But I think for a lot of people that will end up happening in some way, and I think it's just kind of what's new sticks with people, I guess. So as far as popularity goes, I think that might happen. Um, but I do totally understand what you're saying there about how it seems like it really references Star Wars more than it references
Mhm.
outside influences and things of that nature, which works on an on a level somewhat, but it can start referencing your own stuff too much. I think it has the chance to fall through, which I think it does sometimes.
Yeah.
So I see
Yeah, I
what you're
think
saying
that
there.
yeah, I think there's some, cracks in the armor in certain places in the sequel trilogy just because it relies too heavily on its own kind of, you know, source material. But
Right, right,
um
right.
and I think where The Mandalorian succeeds so much is it does the
It
same kind
goes
of thing
back
George
to
Lucas
right.
did. It goes back
Yeah.
to those tropes and those universal things like mythology and Western influences, samurai influences, and I think that's why it succeeds so much because it tells a rather simple story, but in a new, different, fresh kind of way, in
Hmm.
a galaxy far, far away. But it tells those same stories that have been told for generations, which is why I think we're seeing The Mandalorian be so successful.
Yeah.
But that's just
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
personal
No.
opinion.
No. Yeah. I mean, we talk about it so much, and just not even with talking about specifically this like Kurosawa stuff or the Western stuff or the samurai stuff. We talk about so much how the Mandalorian just feels like it's going back to what Lucas did in the '70s, and I think
Hmm.
part of it is the stuff. I think part of it's the feel and the look. You're going back to the planets like Tatooine, you get that feel again. There's some of that nostalgia there. So you talk about you're talking about the Mandalorian is going back to what Lucas did because it feels like Star Wars. But
Hmm.
then maybe without knowing it, it's also because it's going back and using inspiration like what we're going to talk about here.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying, and
Right.
why I feel like that's part of the reason why it's so successful right now.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
original trilogy is kind of this timeless thing because, you know, these stories are, whether in our conscious or subconscious mind, or stories that have been around forever, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and I think, Adam, we both agree that Kurosawa would be a great place to start with this, Mythology
Yeah,
of Star Wars series,
yeah,
just
because we
because.
right we talked about starting this right after the episode of the Jedi, and we talked about that last week, how that episode seemed to be so heavily influenced on samurai, and those
Mhm,
types of stories. But then there was also that mashup where it was samurai slash western, and before even knowing and watching the Hidden Fortress, we talked about that would be a great place to start, and it turns out that it was. And we'll
mhm.
get into this more because Hidden Fortress is that kind of samurai movie, but it's also doing some research on this.
It
It's also
it
western
has
inspired too.
Western elements, is
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, yeah, Kurosawa was very, influenced by,
Right.
Western
Right.
stories, so very interesting how these creators draw inspiration from each other.
Mhm.
And in an interview from 2001 with George Lucas, he explained that he was exposed to Akira Kurosawa when he attended film school, and
Yeah.
that's when he really started watching his films, and that he was very impressed by the visual style and the quality of the images. Um, and Kurosawa was also actually inspired by silent films and relied heavily on visuals for telling stories. And we know how much George Lucas is all about the visual aspect of telling a story versus the dialogue.
Yeah.
Um, so let's get into some of the similarities between the Hidden Fortress and Star Wars, because I had never watched the Hidden Fortress before,
Me either.
and it's astonishing the
It's
similarities,
right off the
really.
bat. Yeah.
It right off the bat.
Yeah.
But first of all, what were your overall thoughts about the movie
I
itself?
wasn't expecting to enjoy this. I was expecting to fall asleep. I was
I wasn't
expecting
either. Yeah. Mhm.
I was expecting to fall asleep. I was expecting to, be bored out of my mind. I actually enjoyed a lot of it. I was it
Yeah.
wasn't hard to get into. It's a pretty straightforward story. There's not, a lot of nuance here, really. I mean,
Right.
there's a little bit, of course, but it's
Mhm.
not like it's not a thinker of a movie. It's just adventure. It's
Mhm.
it's fun. I wasn't I was pleasantly surprised by what I thought about Hidden Fortress.
I'm with you. And as much as a film fan as I am, I kinda struggle with watching some older films and stuff like that. I mean, I did take a couple film classes in college, and, um, watched some older films. I'm struggling to think of the name of one of them right now. Um One of the hopefully I'll think of it, but it was a while ago. Um, but yeah, but I was pleasantly surprised by this too,
Yeah.
and I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it has some funny elements to it.
Oh
There's
yeah,
a lot
it's
of good
good, really good
humor,
comedy. I mean, there's times where I was
some good
laughing. Yeah,
action.
yeah.
I thought that we'll talk about the duel a little bit later, but
Yeah.
the duel with the spears I thought
Hmm.
was really cool, which kind of made me think of Mandalorian as well.
Made me, yeah,
Um,
made me think of lightsabers, to be honest.
yeah, and lightsabers, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by it, though I was slightly annoyed by the peasants, who I
Oh,
kinda call the fools of the story.
I
I think
mean,
that
they
if you're
were.
annoyed by C-3PO, you will be very annoyed by these 2
Well, I
characters.
mean, I was even like even C-3PO has redeeming qualities. These two have no
Yeah,
redeeming
they have
qualities.
no redeeming qualities, yeah.
They are
Um, and that it's
greedy
for a
and
reason, it's on
yeah, for
purpose.
sure. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, right off the bat, you mentioned 3PO. So I mean, right off the bat, seeing these two, I was like, okay, well, that's R2 and 3PO.
Yeah,
You
so
know,
these 2 peasants, these 2 fools
yeah.
are R2 and 3PO, and George Lucas, found it very interesting to start his story with 2 of he kinda said the lowest,
Hmm.
um, characters, whether it's droids or, in this case, peasants. And so Hidden Fortress begins with 2 peasants walking through kind of a desert, almost like a desert area. After a battle, they're insulting each other. It's just like 3PO and R2.
If you
Just
could, I'm thinking as I'm watching that, if you could translate what R2 is calling 3PO, it might be. I can't say it
it
on the
was like,
show. It was like crap worm, but crap was not used. They were
yeah,
calling
yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah. It was
I mean,
That
if
was
you could
funny.
translate what R2 is calling 3PO, it might be something like that.
It was something like that. Yeah. And these they both go their separate ways, just like R2 and 3PO, and both of them get
Yeah,
captured.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
you
There
know
was times I'm
it's the
thinking,
beginning of
okay,
Star
so this
Wars.
is where the
Yeah.
Jawas come in,
Hmm.
right? So I mean,
Yeah.
it felt almost exactly like Tatooine for the first. Even the music in the background, I was like, okay,
Hmm.
maybe there's some inspiration here for John Williams. This music in the background almost feels like that Tatooine music.
Yeah, it was crazy that I didn't realize that this movie really existed. I heard of it before and but never noticed how similar they are
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And then we also have, of course, Princess Yuki of Akizuki, and
Yeah,
forgive
so
me for the
this is going to be a segment where for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to just butcher some Japanese names. So,
yeah, we're seriously. So
so
I'm
if you're
sorry. I
all
don't
out
want
there
to offend
listening, okay
anybody.
with that, then enjoy.
Um, yeah. So we have this princess, and like Leia, this is a very fierce princess.
Yeah, yeah.
And basically, these characters are trying to help the princess escape, get across enemy lines. It's kind of a similar storyline to A New Hope with Princess Leia. Um, yeah,
And I
did you
see we'll
have any
talk
more
about this.
impressions
Well,
on
yeah,
this?
I did. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But not only just Leia, but I was getting some very Padme vibes
Mhm,
from Princess
mhm.
Yuki, and for more ways than one. And we'll talk about some of that later. But I mean, even some of the plot here, and I don't want to step on this next part that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But even the plot of getting her out of enemy territory, back to her throne city or whatever you're going to call it. Um, it's very Phantom Menace. That whole plot line of
Mhm,
Phantom Menace is,
mhm.
it's there. And not just Princess Yuki, but like, um, even Qui Gon is the old general. Being in charge of leading
Yeah.
that. There's parts where Qui Gon's questioning the princess is questioning Qui Gon. Padme, that whole thing. A lot of that same stuff is happening in this movie between Princess Yuki and the general there as well. So
Mhm. Yeah. A lot of similarities with
yeah.
the prequels as well.
Hmm.
Um, and there's this one point in the beginning where the two fools again they get caught in the middle of this battle, and they're very sure they're gonna die. It's just like C-3PO, we're
I mean,
doomed.
like
We're,
even then. So if you
um,
if you continue that prequel thing, that's almost the Jar Jar thing in two separate characters. He gets caught up in the
mhm,
middle of the battle and he thinks he's gonna die, and that's the same thing that happens with those guys. I mean, you know, the
yeah.
similarities are almost endless there.
Right, and there's a lot of not just story similarities, there's
Hmm.
also these visual similarities, and
Sure. Yeah.
I thought the screen wipes
Screen
originated with
wipes.
Star Wars, but
No,
I
I
think they
noticed
might have
that too.
originated here.
Yeah, I noticed that. I saw that on your outline last night after I finished it, and I was like, yeah. I
Yeah,
was
so
glad you caught that because yeah, I was surprised to see that too. I was like, okay, well, there's
yeah,
a screen wipe even.
that's where those came from.
Yep.
Yeah, the screen wipes, here in the
Like I
Hidden
even
Fortress
noticed
are
it.
used.
Yeah, I even noticed it at the beginning, like with the two peasants. They're going through the desert, and it feels like that R2 3PO thing, and then like, oh well, there's a screen wipe that felt.
Yep,
you know, it's
yep,
almost like it felt like it should be there, and there it was.
right, yeah, it's astonishing.
Yeah.
Um, and not that this is a bad thing. I think that, the greatest form of compliment is imitation.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think any storyteller is probably going to take things from other things that have inspired him and but just tweak them and make them their own.
It's
um
happened since the
so,
beginning of time. you know.
yeah, yeah, so I'm not criticizing at all.
No.
I think it's
Same here.
I think it's great.
Yep. Yep.
um and we also get this shot, speaking of visual similarities, of General Makabe. I don't know how to, that's what I'm gonna go with. Standing, I don't know how to say it.
I don't
He's
know either.
standing on top of the hill, looking down at the peasants, and he has his arms crossed, and he's looking
Yeah.
over them,
Hmm.
and it looks very similar to Obi-Wan standing at the top of the ramp of Padme's ship, looking down on Anakin and Padme on Mustafar, in Revenge of the Sith.
Hmm.
So it was a very similar thing, and
Yeah.
I thought that
Yeah.
was
Definitely.
interesting too. Hmm. And This is another thing that ties into the prequels too, with, the princess's supporters used a double of her. Just like with Padme, they used
Just like with
doubles,
yep,
to protect her,
yep,
and her double was killed, which is similar to the beginning of Attack of the Clones too,
mhm,
where her double, I think is it Corday or something like that?
yeah,
I think is maybe her name. Um, she gets killed in that explosion in the beginning of Attack of the Clones.
mhm.
So, yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, and, like, that was what I was dancing around before is the use of a double,
Mhm.
yeah, but that double gets killed, and Princess Yuki is pretty rough on the general. For that, it really kind of lays into him, doesn't trust him. It really reminded me of Padme on
Mhm.
not quite seeing eye to eye
With
with Qui
Qui-Gon?
Gon so much.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And, I also noticed that in a similar move to Obi-Wan and A New Hope doing the Jedi mind trick on the stormtroopers and, Mos Eisley to
hmm
kind of get them past that checkpoint, General Makabe also tricked the guards of the town that they were passing through, with the kind of the gold that he had. He kinda tricked them,
right,
and they were able to pass through that area, so I thought that was another similarity there.
yeah,
And again, back to some of the visual similarities. There was this scene basically with this horse chase, and you could tell from like the panning shots and the camera angles that were used, it was kind of inspired the trench run in A New Hope as well. So I thought that was pretty
oh
cool.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you
No,
noticed that or
actually,
not, but
that's one that I didn't pick up on, but that's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. If you go back and you're able to
hmm
check that out, it kind of
I'm
reminded
thinking
me of
about
the
it now.
trench run.
Yeah, no, I'm visually seeing it in my mind's eye. That makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that scene leads directly to this duel,
Yes.
um, which reminded both of us of a lightsaber duel,
Yeah.
or and the this was very similar to the feel of a lightsaber duel. And I'm
Yeah.
sure
Yeah.
George Lucas watched this and he was like, "Oh, this is
See,
so
that's kind
gripping,"
of how I felt. Like it's almost like so you take this and then you take a western. So then you have your western where you
Mhm.
get your like Han Solo type character, the
Yeah.
shootout type guy, and then
Mhm.
you combine that. Okay, well that's cool. But I also like this little samurai part. So you just kind of put those all
Yeah.
together,
So
and you end
I
up
need like
with
a Jedi type
right,
character,
right,
and
right. So that you end up with these knights you know, um, with lightsabers or laser swords, but in here you
yeah,
have the spears, and it's this duel is almost a little bit more reserved, almost like Kenobi versus Vader and
versus
four.
Vader.
But then it
Yeah.
kind of does get it's a little bit crazy, kind of going in through some of the different parts of this base that they're in. Um, it almost feels a little bit more not like acrobatic like the prequels, but almost a little bit more. I don't maybe Empire Strikes Back, Luke versus Vader and Empire
Yeah.
Strikes Back. It almost feels like that at some points too.
Especially when they start using the surroundings and stuff like
Yes, yeah,
that,
right, exactly, right,
it
right.
that's when it reminded me of the Empire Duel for
Yeah, so they're
sure.
knocking over these like I don't even know what to call them. These like tablets or
Yeah.
something, and just kind of using
Mhm.
those as like almost offensive or defensive, weapons at that point. But
Right.
yeah, it feels like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the lightsaber duel became so iconic to Star Wars, and it's seen in almost every
Right.
Star Wars film, this lightsaber duel, you know what I mean? And
hmm
and it all maybe all started and originated here with this
I
Kurosawa
have to
film.
think that maybe yeah, I have to think that might be true.
Yeah, and, just the idea of having that duel, that one-on-one
Yeah.
kind of showdown, even though there's all these other soldiers around and stuff, it comes down to these
hmm
2 characters,
Yeah.
fighting off against each other.
I mean, it almost feels like
And
that too. I mean, the stormtroopers never really
Mhm.
get involved in a duel. They all kind of stand
Right.
back and they let
Mhm.
the Jedi just kind of duel it out.
Right. And I'm wondering if maybe even The Matrix drew inspiration from this type of film
Hmm.
too,
Oh,
because in The Matrix Revolutions, which I just watched recently again, we see this showdown between Neo and Agent Smith. And there's all these other copies of Agent Smith
right.
taking that have taken over the Matrix, and they're all just watching these two duel it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was kind of like that too.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And then the last thing I had was toward the end of the film, we see a shot of the princess and General Makabe and this other character who I
Right.
can't remember the name.
He's the
Kind
general
of
for
they're
the other army. Yeah, that ends up
yeah,
kind of leaving with them because he helps them
right.
escape.
Right, and they're kind of walking towards our 2 foals, our 2 peasants,
Yeah.
and it looks very similar to the last scene in A New Hope with the medal ceremony and everything like that. Did you
Yeah.
pick up on that, Adam?
Not really. I mean, at that point, I was just kind of done with those two.
Yeah.
Like I said before, there are no redeeming qualities for those two
No.
because they're trying to steal, and I mean, at one point it gets really dirty as the princess is sleeping and they're deciding who's gonna take advantage of her while she's sleeping.
Right, right.
They are disgusting
Yeah,
characters.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I don't
they're
know if the end
miserable
is
to
supposed to make me
watch.
feel okay about it because, they weren't so greedy at the end. They got like one little piece of gold or something, and then
Mhm.
just they were trying to s- convince the other one to take it, almost like they're not greedy anymore because everything's okay. I don't know if I'm supposed to
Yeah,
feel okay about that because I don't.
yeah.
They were pretty. I don't know. But
It was
yeah,
tough to
but yeah,
watch through,
I
yeah.
know what you mean by the medals ceremony. It has that
Mhm.
sort of feel. They get their
Yeah,
reward, and I
right.
mean, the whole time through this whole thing about the rewards and the goal. I mean, I'm thinking Han Solo here. Because through
Yes.
New Hope is Han getting his reward and his money and
He's
all
all
this
about
stuff
getting
is all
the
that
reward, yeah.
it's
Mhm.
that vibe the whole way through with them.
Yeah.
When they're gonna break out, when they're gonna leave this whole thing behind and get out of this whole situation with their money and that type. So I'm getting those Han Solo vibes out of this the whole time.
Mhm.
But man, those two peasants, ugh,
Yeah, the worst.
they really are.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I think that brings us pretty close to the end of our examination of the Hidden Fortress specifically and Star Wars, unless there's anything I might have missed that I didn't mention here.
Good for me. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I'm excited to dive into some more stuff and
yeah,
and and look into some other things that have influenced Star Wars. This is just part one of an ongoing series that has no set number to it,
yeah, we'll just
until
yeah,
we get tired of doing
et
it.
cetera, and then
Um,
it's done.
yeah. So if you enjoyed this segment, then stick around for our future segments of the mythology of Star Wars. And